This video sponsor, Displate, keep getting blown away by how many of you are heading over to Displate.com and picking up 1, 2, 3 or more of these bad boys. So they've asked if we can do another shout out on the channel to promote some seriously big discounts, and here we are. You've probably heard of Displate by now. They make metal posters featuring both licensed and independent art. For example, they have a Destiny 2 storefront, a bittersweet way to commemorate and remember the game we lost. Still makes me more than a little sad whenever I see these up on my wall. I ordered 3 of these things, and just a few days later, they arrived in the mail. The next part was super easy because Displate stick to your walls with magnets. I actually had some Elden Ring Displates up already, and since the magnets were already on the wall, in just a few seconds, I had a completely different setup. And by the way, you can actually design your own Displates. This is one that I made featuring my favorite non-family photo, that time I got to meet Kojima-san. That's right, I will never not take the opportunity to show that photo. Best of all, they're incredibly affordable, even more affordable right now due to a special offer that's available exclusively to viewers of this channel. Click the link below or scan the QR code on screen to get 22% off one Displate, 27% off 2 Displates, and up to 33% off 3 or more Displates. Those discounts are only available if you click the link below or scan the QR code and use offer code SKILLUP at checkout. Not available on limited edition Displates, but everything else is fair game. Thanks Displate for sponsoring the video, and now let's get to it. Gamers, the great Xbox reset is finally here, and I think we can all agree this reset is kind of good, or at the very least not as bad as we were expecting. I mean, we were all collectively braced for the worst. We were expecting thousands of job losses. Oh wait, sorry, that actually is happening. Xbox is sacking 3,200 people this year. Well look, we were all really worried about the fate of Double Fine, Compulsion, Ninja Theory, and Undead Labs, but now their future is secure, right? Wait, hang on a second. Compulsion and Double Fine are gonna go independent at a time when game funding deals are rarer than hen's teeth, and Ninja Theory and Undead Labs are getting sold to some mysterious buyers, and we have absolutely no idea what their plans for these studios might be? Well look, at least Arcane survived, right? I mean, that's an incredibly talented studio with a decades-long track record, and they're currently making a Marvel game. Xbox would have been incredibly dumb to part ways with them, and thankfully, common sense prevailed. And sorry, I'm just being handed a note here that says, Xbox is currently in consultations with the French government about their plans for Arcane? Okay, well look, just focus on the bright side, okay? We still have Obsidian and id Software. These are real flagship studios that have constantly delivered well-made, technically polished games. id in particular, I mean, id Tech is literally the greatest FPS engine ever made, and I fear the power of the tech wizards that somehow get it to run at like 200 FPS on PCs that are 10 years old. But that's id Software for you, man. Or at least it was, because more than 130 of id's staff were laid off this week, including a significant number of their programmers and QA testers. Oh, and around 25% of Obsidian was let go too. Probably not a great time to mention that over 200 people were laid off from ZeniMax Online Studios, and that the future of the Elder Scrolls Online is anything but certain at this point. But don't worry guys, Mojang and King report directly to Asha Sharma now, and they appointed a COO for the first time ever, so I personally am feeling really good about the future of Xbox right now. If I am being flippant, it's because I do not at all fuck with the way that this latest news is being received. The news that the trillion-dollar corporation points to Obsidian, id's game engine, and Psychonauts and says, yep, there's your problem. Here's someone who I think frames it rather sensibly. Bernie Sanders, quote, last year, Microsoft made $101 billion in profits, got a $12.5 billion tax break from Trump, and paid its CEO $96 million. This year, it's raising the price of an Xbox by $150 and eliminating 3,200 jobs, end quote. I do this every time, but do you know you could employ 960 people at $100,000 each for a full year for the same amount of money that you're paying to one dude for 1 year. A dude who, mind you, shoulders a fair share of the blame for the current state of Xbox. Always helpful to put a potential headcount on a CEO's salary whenever they're sacking thousands of people, I found. Now look, do I think that nothing at Xbox should have changed? Of course I don't. Clearly their business was not working, and buried in Asha's email was a fair amount of sensible stuff which we will cover, but I bristle at the framing of all of this as though Xbox is making the best of a bad situation when they're the ones that made the situation bad. As if Microsoft is somehow doing these companies a favor by letting them continue to exist in some amorphous form. Like, you bought these studios, you gave them their marching orders, you managed them and are presently managing them as they continue to make cool looking games that people are excited to play, and now you want to jettison that because you want to make more Elder Scrolls games? You want to sack id Software staff after their generational run this past decade, and sack Obsidian staff after they delivered you like 30% of your first party output over the last 5 years. For me, I think this is a profoundly sad day for Xbox, not only because it sees 1,600 people lose their jobs just today, and another 1,600 people lose their jobs very soon, but also because it signals the end of an important era of Xbox, one where smaller games and smaller teams still mattered. This reset is entirely about aligning all of Xbox's resources behind big existing franchises so they can become even bigger, but they already have Minecraft and Candy Crush and Call of Duty and Warcraft and Diablo and Overwatch and Forza and Elder Scrolls and Doom and Fallout and on, and it's still just not enough. I'm all for making Fallout New Vegas 2, I truly am, but I'm also interested, deeply interested in fact, in Microsoft investing in smaller teams and smaller games, and not only because I think Microsoft has a responsibility to help fund games that might not otherwise get made, but also because I think Microsoft is a deeply uncreative business, and if it's going to learn how to become creative, then better to do that learning on smaller projects built by smaller teams, rather than spending another $500 million on a Gears of War game. Think of how much treasure has been spilled by Microsoft over the past generation as it struggled to do anything with the majority of its flagship franchises, and somehow Tim Schafer ends up losing his job? This shit is just so ass backwards. Anyway, look, I'm getting worked up. Let's take it from the top and try to cover all these details properly. Earlier this week, new Xbox boss Asha Sharma released the Great Reset Manifesto, a blog post on the Xbox Wire feed that outlined Xbox plans for studio spinouts, job cuts, and resource reallocation. It begins, quote, "Team, we are beginning the most significant restructure in Xbox history. After careful consideration, I've made the difficult decision to reduce our team by approximately 3,200 throughout FY27. This will include approximately 1,600 role eliminations today, and in addition, 4 studios will leave Xbox to new management. I recognize that a year-long restructuring creates additional challenges. Unfortunately, it's not possible to make all of the necessary changes in a single day, and I want to be direct about the scale," end quote. To put these layoffs in perspective, this is the largest single cut that Xbox has ever admitted to. Since the July 2025 layoffs saw Microsoft sack 9,000 people across their whole business, with a significant but undisclosed number of those being Xbox employees. That's 3,200 people who will probably have to leave the games industry entirely now. Since it's not like anyone's hiring, it adds to the estimated 45,000 people who have been laid off from games industry roles over the last 5 years, many of them forced to leave the industry forever, a permanent brain drain for video games, the impacts of which will be felt for many, many years to come. Sharma would then go on to outline her causus belli, quote, "Our business today is not healthy. We are operating at margins that are 3 to 10 times lower than comparable platform and publishing businesses. We entered Gen 9 with a smaller install base and a higher cost structure. To grow, we bet on Game Pass, multi-platform, and a broader portfolio of content. While these businesses have created meaningful value, they did not grow at the pace we expected. As that happened, our core business weakened, and we added more teams, more investment, and more time, hoping for a better outcome. And now the industry is facing the most severe hardware crisis in its history. We must reset Xbox," end quote. Sharma isn't lying here, and this is a remarkably candid assessment of Xbox's strategy and failures under Phil Spencer's leadership. Phil thought that the hardware battle was all but lost at the start of Gen 9, an admission he made during a Kinda Funny podcast appearance where he said that Xbox lost the most important console generation, the one where we all built our digital libraries. In response, he opened up new fronts, Game Pass and xCloud, and while both found growth, neither of them delivered the scale needed to justify the significant investment into them or the transformative impact that Game Pass would have on buying habits, since Xbox console owners were effectively being trained to no longer purchase games, a point that we here at thisweekinvideogames.com have covered extensively after developers started telling us this years ago. But Asha conveniently leaves out one line item in this list of growth vectors, the acquisition of Activision Blizzard King for $69 billion, a sum so vast that it would completely destabilize the Xbox business. When that happened, I said at the time that the earn-out imperative would supersede all else, and that it would be absolutely impossible for Xbox to care about its smaller teams and projects when its balance sheet was so lopsided. That naturally led to Xbox to adopt a multi-platform release model, since the business was now more leveraged into its IP holdings than its platform install base. And this week, it's also naturally led to Xbox jettisoning almost every studio that isn't stewarding a blockbuster IP. And not for nothing, but it's at least a little amusing that Sharma points to the present hardware crisis without mentioning that Microsoft is literally one of the biggest reasons that this hardware crisis exists, since they're spending some $190 billion on AI-related capex this year. Oh no, but Double Fine is too expensive to keep on the balance sheet. Sure, let's frame it that way. Speaking of which, let's look at what Sharma says about the decision to spin out 4 studios this week. Quote, "Since 2018, we have aggressively expanded our studio portfolio, while the number of games created each month across the industry now outpaces the last 10 years combined. We now find ourselves competing not only with the largest publishers, but also with smaller independent studios. It's neither possible nor desirable to own every great independent studio. We have also learned that we are not the best home for every type type of studio. In a typical year, we lost 64 cents for every dollar we invested. As we reset Xbox, we will help independent creators succeed by providing open development tools and audiences to realize their vision, end quote. Okay, so this is where I really started to get pissed off. I think the framing of this whole paragraph is too clever by half, and I really do tip my hat to whoever wrote it because I think it's done a fantastic job of muddying the waters around Microsoft's decision. Firstly, Microsoft's small studios were never competing with other independent studios. That's ridiculous framing. People who are interested in this segment of the market don't buy one indie game a year, they buy half a dozen or more. Just because I bought Psychonauts doesn't mean I'm not going to buy Mina the Hollower, so putting it this way I think is just really disingenuous. Secondly, it's neither possible nor desirable to own every great independent studio. Of course it fucking isn't. No one's saying that you should. What are you talking about? This is just more nonsense. Thirdly, we have also learned that we are not the best home for every type of studio. In a typical year, we lost 64 cents for every dollar we invested. And I've seen this figure bandied about so much since this post went up, with people being like, well, clearly Xbox had to get rid of those 4 studios. They were losing so much money on them. But how much of that 64 cents loss could be attributed to Double Fine, which never had more than about 100 people on its staff? Or Compulsion, or Ninja Theory, or Undead Labs, who all had about the same headcount. 400 people on an average of around 100,000 per year is $40 million a year, by the way, for a company that pays its CEO $96 million a year, and that this year is spending $175,000 million on data centers in 1 year. So don't put these two figures next to each other and try to argue that these 4 studios had to go so that Xbox could survive. And even if you were to zero in on these studios, how are you measuring losses? What's the calculation? First-party games aren't just about their baseline profitability. They're also about how much they attract people to your ecosystem and how much they round out your portfolio so you have different things to offer to different audiences. Did you know that Psychonauts 2 is literally the only Xbox game from the past generation to receive a nomination for Game of the Year at the Game Awards? How do you put that on a profit and loss statement? And for the record, I'm not saying these studios are perfect. Obviously, South of Midnight did not sell well, and obviously Undead Labs have been spinning their wheels for far too long while making State of Decay 3. I do think there is a case to be made for some changes to be made at these studios, but I really don't accept the framing that these studios had to go because they were costing Microsoft, a company worth nearly $3 trillion, too much money. These studios were never meant to make you lots of money. That was never their purpose, and it sucks to see that being used as a justification for their jettison. Anyway, Sharma went on to clarify what exactly would be happening to these 4 studios. Quote, Compulsion Games and Double Fine Productions will return to management and transition to independent studios with their IP, catalog, and runway for their next games. Ninja Theory and Undead Labs have entered into terms to join new ownership with funding to compete and grow Senua and State of Decay 3, end quote. Admittedly, in a world where most publishers, including Xbox, just shut down studios and hoard their IP like Stuff Goblins, this is one of the more gracious ways to part ways with a studio that we've seen. Negotiated sales, IP rights, back catalog, and runway funding. It does help these studios navigate this next period, sure, but what about beyond that? For Compulsion and Double Fine in particular, they're now independent studios in need of funding at a time when the funding cupboard is well and truly bare. And as for Undead Labs and Ninja Theory's new owners, we have no idea what plans they have for these studios, so we don't yet know if this is truly a safe harbor. Sharma then revealed that Arcane Leon was also on the chopping block, but couldn't provide any details on that since French labor laws are very strict, and so Microsoft has now entered into negotiations with the relevant authorities. Hard to imagine that those negotiations end with Microsoft still owning Arcane and agreeing to fund Blade to completion. This is Arcane Leon, by the way, who made Dishonored and Deathloop, and who secured a Marvel IP deal and are now facing the possibility of closure. Ironically, I do think the fact that Blade is a Marvel IP may be what endangers them most. With Microsoft fully aligning behind its own IP, why invest in building up an IP owned by Disney? EA reached the same conclusion when they slowed down their investment in Star Wars titles some years ago. I wonder if Sony might one day come to that same conclusion. For a missive that seems so willing to provide specifics when it's convenient, Sharma's vagueness in this next section is notable. Quote, "We are also making reductions across other units, and in some cases, shifting investment to focus on higher priority projects. These changes vary in size across Activision, Bethesda, ZeniMax, Blizzard, King, Mojang, and Xbox Game Studios. None of our first-party publicly announced games or projects are being cancelled as part of these reductions," end quote. So, what were these reductions? Well, the picture is coming into view bit by bit. For example, Kotaku reported that Obsidian lost around 25% of their people. This is a studio that has been an absolute content powerhouse for Xbox this past generation, delivering Grounded 1 and 2, Pentiment, Avowed, and The Outer Worlds 2. And look, not all of those games were fantastic and not all of them were smash hits. But there's an argument to be made that Obsidian is one of the most efficiently run studios in the business right now, since their output has been borderline prodigious in an era where some studios take 10 plus years to release a single game. You claim to want to focus on getting more games out the door, and then you sack people who have done a better job of that than any other studio in your stable? Like, what do you even say to that? That's all the more maddening because Jason Schreier of Bloomberg is reporting that Obsidian were working on Avowed 2, but that project has since been cancelled so that Obsidian can now work on a new Fallout game led by Josh Sawyer, director of the recent Pentiment, but before that, director of Fallout New Vegas. So it doesn't take much imagination to guess that we're finally going to get New Vegas 2, and we'd probably be getting it sooner and at a better level of quality if Microsoft hadn't just sacked 25% of Obsidian. We also know by way of a publicly filed warn notice that ZeniMax Online Studios, the team behind The Elder Scrolls Online, lost 213 people, and while we don't know what proportion of the studio that was, it's clearly a significant amount given that reports put the studio's estimated headcount at somewhere between 300 and 500 developers, though that was before the layoffs related to Project Blackbird mid last year. We don't know what the fate of The Elder Scrolls Online might be, but community manager Jessica Folsom did post on community forums saying, quote, "The roadmaps we previously shared will be shifting," end quote. But the real kicker here is the absolute decimation of id Software, with roughly 130 people of their 200-person studio cut, with many of the roles focused on technical disciplines like programming and quality assurance. And I don't know how many of you know this, but id's technical legacy is basically peerless in the world of video games. It is a great source of pride for this studio that they pioneered numerous graphical and engine technologies, and that their games were so influential. The id Tech engine is still technological black magic, delivering absolutely absurd performance on even low-end hardware at a time when I can't get most AAA games running at 60 FPS on my 5090. These cuts have thrown into question the future of the id Tech engine, since Microsoft seems more than happy to move a lot of their developers over to Unreal Engine, just like they did for Halo Studios. Some former id Software employees have openly speculated that a move to Unreal seems likely, but there's been no official confirmation of that. Our staff at thisweekinvideogames.com actually checked with a source at Microsoft who has some knowledge of the matter, and they indicated that Microsoft does plan to continue utilizing the id Tech engine into the future, but the obvious question then becomes, who's going to maintain that engine when you've just fired so many of the people who have built it or are trained in it? There is a Frankfurt-based id studio who seem to specialize in the id Tech engine, so perhaps we can guess that they'll now fully own it going forward, but Microsoft have not provided any clarification on this. All of this talk has just been about the technical side of id, where their creative side is just as strong. Art design, level design, combat design, you name it, id crush it. And talk about consistency. This studio has put out 3 games in a 10-year period, all of them with vastly different core combat models, all of them technically flawless, and all of them critically and commercially successful. In fact, I'm going to show you something. 2 weeks ago, I participated in a group interview with id's co-directors Hugo Martin and Marty Stratton, and I asked them, how has id managed to put out 3 incredible polished games inside a 10-year period at a time when there's so much pressure on AAA game development? Here's what Hugo Martin told me, quote, "For us internally, we have the pressures of the founders, the team that came before us. They literally invented a genre and made one of the greatest shooters, greatest video games of all time. Anytime there's a top 5 list, Doom 1 is usually on that list. So it's kind of like they made The Godfather, so our project, it has to be good. And there's a lot of internal pressure there, but we live for it. It's why we came here. It's why I came here. It's cheesy, but it's an honor to do this stuff," end quote. That is the pride that these people take in their work. That is the bar they set for themselves, and yet by some miracle, they managed to clear that bar every single time, and it still wasn't enough. You can literally be perfect in every category, technical, creative, commercial, and it still isn't enough to protect your studio or your job, just like it didn't protect Tango Gameworks. And this is why you do not, on any level, have to hand it to Microsoft for their handling of this reset. I don't care what the trillion-dollar corporation says about their margins, because ultimately, it doesn't matter. Make an average game that doesn't sell, get laid off. Make multiple incredible games that all sell gangbusters. Believe it or not, still get laid off. Sharma would go on to detail further proposed cuts to Xbox's platform business, the people responsible for things like Game Pass, xCloud, publishing, etc. She says that some decisions were going through 14 layers of management, and said that a significant flattening of management layers would take effect in order to enable better decision-making and coordination. In that context, Sharma signaled an end to one of the defining characteristics of Phil Spencer's leadership, the autonomy he afforded his studios. Phil famously said that his job was to acquire great studios and then just get out of the way to let them make the things that they want to make. And while that sometimes worked, it very often didn't. And toward the end of Phil's tenure, it became clear that this hands-off approach had not delivered a sustainable pipeline of high-quality games. Sharma characterized it this way, quote, "As Xbox grew our headcount, we became more fragmented. Teams, studios, and functions often operated independently, and it became harder to work toward a shared goal, make the right trade-offs, and get things done," end quote. In response, Sharma is appointing Helen Chang as Xbox's first COO, the implication being that a more central style of management will be brought to bear, allowing for Xbox to make decisions and allocate resources in a more coordinated fashion. Quote, "These changes are about a bigger future for Xbox, not a smaller one. The next decade of gaming will be larger, more global, and more creative than anything we've seen before. This year, we'll invest as much in Xbox as we ever have, but we'll invest with greater focus, greater discipline, and greater clarity, all in service of making Xbox where the world plays and creates. I want Xbox to be one of the few companies that entertains more than 1 billion people each day and gives everyone the opportunity to create and connect," end quote. A very ambitious goal, given that Xbox currently reaches about 500 million people per month. Can Call of Duty, Todd Howard, and Candy Crush deliver a 60-fold increase in that figure? I guess we're about to find out. So look, that's all we know or is reported at the current moment, and I'm sure more details are going to trickle out over the coming days, but I would stress that 1,600 more Xbox employees are guaranteed to lose their jobs over the next few months, in addition to the 1,600 people who lost their jobs today, in addition to the 400 staff attached to the studios being spun out today, in addition to Arcane Leon staff, and their headcount is around 130 people. That's a total of 5 studios and more than 3,500 people leaving Xbox in the next few months, with even some of Xbox's most critically and commercially acclaimed studios affected. So please, miss me with the Xbox actually handled this pretty well bullshit. I'm 100% with Digital Foundry on this. This is worse than we were expecting, and I think we all have to wait until the wreckage comes to a complete stop before we can stand back and fully appreciate how much has been lost or destroyed here. A quick lightning round now to serve as a bit of a palate cleanser, and Sony certainly haven't had a great couple of weeks. What with Twitter being basically unusable for them after their recent physical media announcement, things haven't gotten any better with the news that Marvel Tokon Fighting Souls has been blocked on Steam in over 130 countries and territories. This is almost certainly related to the PSN requirement, since the 130 countries and territories listed do not have official support for the PSN, and Valve implemented that policy in an attempt to remain legally compliant in those areas. There are, of course, ways around that for players motivated enough, but there's also going to be more than a few people who are going to miss out on Tokon as a result of this. Hopefully Sony can change this PSN requirement or the policies around it at some point, but they haven't done so yet, so I wouldn't hold my breath. If you're hoping that Sony might do an about-face on that recent physical media announcement, then I've got bad news for you. They've already moved on and have started a new relationship with a hot new component called an optical micro lens. Sony have already begun repurposing their disc printing plant in Austria, which used to produce upwards of 600,000 discs every day. Now they use this component, which is used in camera lenses and headsets. Keep the Twitter pressure on, people. It's probably not going to do anything, but it is funny to watch. Speaking of physical discs, according to The Verge, Xbox is apparently working on a disc-to-digital feature that will allow users to digitize physical copies of games. According to The Verge's sources, the feature will require players to insert a disc into a console with a disc drive, install the game, and sign into their Microsoft account to claim a digital entitlement that is then tied to that account. Swapping a physical disc with a friend will result in that game's digital entitlement jumping over to the other account. Discs will reportedly still be playable after you've redeemed a digital version. The Verge claims that this will only work for Xbox Series X and Xbox One discs and won't be compatible with original Xbox or Xbox 360 discs. A system like this makes a lot of sense if a company doesn't plan to support physical disc drives in future product releases. So if this reporting is true, I certainly wouldn't expect Project Helix to support physical media. Not that we ever really expected it to in the first place. That little known indie gem, Cyberpunk 2077, has now sold through 40 million units. This news comes during the Steam sale where the game was sold at a tidy discount, pushing the daily concurrent player count back up over 100,000 people. That's like 20 marathons. We used to use Concord as a unit metric, but times have moved on since. How about an actual indie success story to finish? French slot game Mecha Chameleon has now sold through 15 million units since its launch just a few weeks ago. Notice how I called it Mecha Chameleon instead of Mecha Chameleon? That's because I got a text from someone being like, please stop mispronouncing it. And you know what? Fair enough. If I sold 15 million units of something, I'd want people to be pronouncing it correctly. I mean, just this week I uploaded a The Blood of Dawnwalker preview, and I truly 100% thought that the name of that game was Blood of the Dawnwalker, to the point where when people began correcting me, my brain was like, what do you mean? Those things are the same. Anyway, I don't even know how I got into this topic. Oh, that's right. Breakout indie French slot hit Mecha Chameleon. big congrats to them. So what got announced or delayed this week, aside from all the layoffs, of course? Well, we did get a couple of delays since we last checked in. The next game from Frictional Games, the developers of Amnesia and Soma, got pushed out to 2027. This is a sci-fi horror game called Ontos, and though it didn't really have a specific window locked down, it seemed like they were aiming for 2026. Maybe this is just a stunt to remind us that this exists. This is PC, PS5, and Xbox Series consoles. The delay was also announced this week for Danganronpa 2x2, which they're calling a full retelling, not a remake, of the very highly regarded murder investigation visual novel. This one featuring an enhanced version of the original story on top of an all-new one. They pushed this one out of 2026 and into early 2027 as well. So in the meantime, if you're looking for a game about teenagers killing each other, you'll just have to boot up Fortnite. It's kind of the same thing, I guess. PC, PlayStation, and Switch platforms for this one. So what came out last week? Well, the first big one we wanted to mention was Doom: The Dark Ages Revelations, the expansion for id Software's excellent shooter, which somehow manages to mix up the Doom combat formula in a new way again with its new chain spear weapon and several other trimmings. No formal reviews for this one, as unfortunately no pre-release code was provided to any outlet, but over on Steam it's currently sitting at very positive, though truth be told, the great majority of those reviews are coming from people who have left a review just to express their sympathies and anger towards the devastating Xbox layoffs that have hit id Software. A nice showing of solidarity there. Here's one about the game itself though, from Steam user Ninja Man, quote, "Best DLC yet. Huge expansion as promised with plenty to do. There's a learning curve with the spear, but it's well worth the effort. The level of challenge is far higher than the base Dark Ages, especially once you start working on the endgame portion. Combat is very demanding of the player at nightmare difficulty, but is completely fair thanks to the toolkit provided. Endgame objectives are even more crazy, but the pacing and difficulty curve feels great. The story is actually pretty good and serves to expand the lore and history of the Slayer. The soundtrack is phenomenal as well, with tons of classic Doom 1/2 themes woven in. This is the perfect capstone to the modern Doom trilogy," end quote. I want to say that hopefully this is not the last twist on Doom we'll see from id, but after the events of this week, I just don't know if that's true. Okay, moving on to a more positive story, Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced. This is the remake that Ubisoft is likely hoping will take off in a big way as they wrestle with their own company reset and make their own sweeping layoffs. This one's landed at a mighty 86 on OpenCritic with over 100 critic reviews counted, which is definitely a stark contrast from the last game held by Ubisoft Singapore, Skull and Bones. Worth noting that this Metacritic score is despite some folks who really didn't like it very much. And I suppose as a remake, there's always going to be some friction for long-time AC fans. One of them is GameSpot's reviewer who landed on a 7 out of 10, saying, quote, "Resynced is half a step towards something truly fantastic. If you play it, you'll see why the original game was the de facto pirate video game for years, but you'll also find a remake that doesn't manage to take the crown from the very game that it's remaking," end quote. On our team, Austin was the one to tackle this one, and can you believe this? This guy never played Black Flag before, so we thought it'd be pretty interesting to see whether we're all just looking at this one with some nostalgia goggles. But you know what? Without the burden of what it was before, he still really loved this. He saw the magic and strengths of the game for what they were, and now he's firmly part of Kenway's crew. I'll drop a link to his review below the like button. By the way, don't forget to hit the like button. Quick trip to Anime and Sports Town now, and Echoes of Aincrad was Namco's new action RPG based on the anime Sword Art Online, and that's landed at a fair 66 on OpenCritic. DualShockers gave it a 6.5 and said the game, quote, "finally understands what fans wanted from this series in the first place," end quote, but that, quote, "Echoes of Aincrad still feels like a game that's only halfway towards reaching its full potential," end quote. And ending now on EA Sports College Football 27, like a hole-in-one at the bottom of the 9th on overtime during a penalty shootout, and other sports references. This annual entry has earned itself a strong 76 on OpenCritic, but with only 5 critic reviews. IGN slapped a 7 out of 10 on this one, knocking the monetization stuff, but ultimately saying, quote, "This season ain't gonna knock anybody's socks off, and both Dynasty and Road to Glory have leaned hard into spreadsheet management this year, but smart on-field additions to an already good game make College Football 27 worth suiting up for once again," end quote. Certainly sounds like a sports game, alright. So what's coming out this week? Well, the floodgates have well and truly opened again after a couple of very quiet weeks in June, and the first wave out the gate is a torrent of indies trying to get over the line before the big dogs start crowding around again. First up, have you heard of this game? It's a little one called Pal World. Made a bit of a splash a little while back, got a few wanted stars from Nintendo cops, and now this thing is finally coming out with its 1.0 version on July 10th, and they're promising some very big overhauls to mark the occasion. A new location, a conclusion of its story, a bunch of new pals. Remember when some off-brand Pokemon seemed like the worst thing in the world to ever happen to video games? Ah, innocent times. PC, PS5, Xbox Series, and Mac for this one. For some reason, not a Switch 2 port in sight. Next week is a very busy one, and it's kicking off with the incident at Galley House, our radar pick from last week. This one's out on July 14th, and as a brief refresher, this is a locked room murder mystery deduction game where you're trying to piece together how a bunch of people in a 1930s mansion all died, but you're doing it many decades later with the help of a weird machine that lets you pick up on old audio waves still lingering in the air, so long as you can lock in on exactly who, where, and when. This one comes from the developers of The Root Trees Are Dead, and it's PC only. Also coming out on July 14th is a game called Detopia. This is actually the latest game being published by Annapurna Interactive, and it's developed by a small indie studio from Japan called Marimitu, made up of 2 people who used to work at acclaimed RPG studio Level 5, known for Ni no Kuni, Professor Layton, and many other games. Detopia is a kind of gentle adventure game where you play a human caretaker in a facility that uses AI to manage the happiness of its residents. Needless to say, you'll step in, hear the stories of the residents, and add that human touch to solve problems that machines can't tackle. This one's hitting all platforms. Another gentle game hitting all platforms the next day on July 15th is called Cozy Groove Camp Spirit. This is the sequel to the crafting/life simulator/management game, which was so good that developer Spryfox got snapped up by Netflix to make this one exclusively for Netflix subscribers on iOS and Android. Then Netflix decided they didn't actually want to develop interesting video games anymore and sold Spryfox off in 2025, letting them once again be independent. Sound like any other corporation you know? Question mark. So yeah, this game was originally released back in 2024, but now these guys are independent. It's landing on absolutely all platforms. Good luck to them. And man, it sure is a big week for cozy games, because also releasing on the 15th is Go-Go Town. It's a kind of hands-on city builder and management game where you play as the mayor. This one's been humming along in early access for a couple of years now with a very positive sentiment behind it, and it finally hits the 1.0 milestone on this day, which comes alongside a Switch 1 and 2 release. Also comes from our part of the world, which is nice. For something a little more intense, look no further than Dench Attack, the high-octane Jet Set Radio-inspired game where you do sick tricks with your train in a reimagined version of Japan. Looks great, definitely one for anyone who likes a bit of reflex-oriented challenge. This game's coming out after a short delay on PC, PS5, Xbox Series consoles, and Switch 2. Also out the same day is a game called The Mound Omen of Cthulhu, which is a co-op first-person Lovecraftian adventure where you and up to 3 players explore a cursed jungle and challenge yourselves to go as deep as you can to search for treasure while fighting off its hostile inhabitants, while also trying to manage a madness system that will mess up what you might see. Kind of like an extraction shooter, but with a big paranoia element between players. This one's being published by the troubled Nacon, and it's also being developed by a little outfit called Ace Team, an indie studio from Chile who have made some very janky but fascinating and interesting games like Rock of Ages and Xenoclash. Definitely have their own vibe, so really interested to see how this one fares. PC, PS5, and Xbox Series consoles for this one. If you like intrigue though, keep an eye out for The Mermaid Mask, which arrives on July 16th. This is the latest from Crow Country developers SFB Games, and it's the latest in their Detective Grimoire series. These are really nicely animated point-and-click adventure games where both puzzles and deduction gameplay plays a big part. These are generally really well regarded, so good things expected for this one as well. PC, PS5, and Switch 1 and 2 for this one. If you've ever owned a VR headset, you've probably heard a little bit about Moss, which joined Astrobot in being a prime example of how you could build a really good 3D platforming game in VR. Now that VR's on the way out for like the 5th time, developers Polyarc have thought to adapt both Moss 1 and 2 into a single game for a flat screen experience. This one's headed to all platforms. Meanwhile, Wreck Runners was one we mentioned a few shows ago. This is a physics-based 4-player co-op extraction game where you play a bunch of robots with gravity guns, essentially, which sounds like a good time on paper, I guess. It's been put together by a studio called Disruptive Games, who have previously helped out on Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 and Diablo 2 Resurrected, among other things, and this seems to be their first original game. This one hits PC, PS5, and Xbox Series consoles. And finally, if you like your multiplayer games on the couch, then Heave Ho 2 is the game for you this week, though I should say you can play this one online as well if you want to. It just won't be as raucous. This is a sequel to the physics-based party game created by Lee Cartel Studio and published by Devolver Digital, where you play a bunch of heads and arms trying to help each other move things through some pretty interesting situations, and no doubt failing spectacularly, but that is all part of the fun, isn't it? PC and Switch 1 and 2 for this one. Last week on this segment, we featured an upcoming game that's slow and cerebral, and this week we've got one for the twitchy action crowd, so put this on your radar. This is a game called Kaz, and it's a roguelike grid-based dungeon crawler about absolutely blitzing your way through a dungeon as fast as humanly possible. You'll start on a tiny, simple map and have 15 seconds to frantically throw your avatar all over the place in order to take out enough enemies before the clock runs out. If you've hit the score threshold, you'll grab an upgrade and head to the next slightly more complex dungeon and try to do the same thing, but faster. Visually, it's going for a pretty minimalist hand-drawn style, but on top it layers all sorts of chunky screen shake and psychedelic explosions and effects that really make the act of running into dozens of enemies really intense. It's an absolute dopamine rush with some nice build craft to think about and a few different classes to play with. And it's just a great game to boot up for a few minutes and then eventually lose an hour or more. For those of you who don't have the APM of a StarCraft Pro, there's also a more chilled out super hot mode where time only moves when you move and you can focus on the build craft elements. Kaz comes out Monday the 13th of July exclusive to Steam, and there's a free demo right now if you'd like to check it out. If you do want to check it out, we've left a link to it over on our Steam curator page, which also has links to all of the other Put This On Your Radar stuff we've recently covered. I'll leave a link to all of that below the like button. Our feel-good story for the week may provide some relief during taxing times. Those times Steam sales. I know you people, I see you, for I am one of you. Our backlogs stretch beyond the physical limits of time and space, and yet whenever a Steam sale banner rolls out, we start looking at that Command & Conquer remaster being like, I'm sure I'll make time for this one, right after my 12th Elden Ring playthrough. Luckily, Mike Wing has got your back. He created the Steam Summer Sale Simulator. Now you can buy games without spending any actual money. Worried that you don't truly own them? Don't worry, my man, you never did, because when you buy stuff on Steam, you're just buying a license to it anyway. Worried that you won't be able to play them because they're not actual games? My dude, you were never gonna play them anyway. Be serious. Mike Wing has done you a goddamn favor here, so be sure to say thank you from repurchasing the Splinter Cell Legacy Bundle at a 75% discount. On second thought though, that price does sound pretty good. Okay, ladies and gents, that is the show for the week. Another bummer, sadly, but surely sometime soon we've got to get some good news, right? Like, God, I hope so. Well, there is some good news, actually. We just launched a Discord for thisweekinvideogames.com. We're going to talk more about it soon when we celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the website. But if you're keen to jump in, then head over to thisweekinvideogames.com, sign up either for free or as a paid supporter, and you can join that Discord right away. It's already buzzing with a few hundred people in there and some great conversation, so we'd love for you to join us. You know what else we'd love? A like, because we're not above asking for that. And if you're new around here, then be sure to subscribe and ding that notification bell. I'm off to play some Dune the Dark Ages Revelations now, since everyone tells me it's peak. Plus, I'm also going to be checking out the Steam Machine this week, since mine arrived, and yeah, we'll talk more about that one later. For now, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye.